PhillyMag.com, Eagles writer Josh Paunil, as he joins us now on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN with a look at the Eagles and the Seahawks and all the things that happened around the Eagles and their win over the Falcons. Josh, what's happening, man?
Hey, man, I'm doing well, but I just want to make sure you know, if Pete's not going to go with you to get crab and eat crab all day with you, just hit me up and I'm there.
You are going to be on the top of my invite. I don't know what kind of man doesn't sit down and have crabs with his buddies, just sitting there at the table for a couple hours shooting around some stories. That's not a real man, Josh.
I'll buy the beverages.
That's a lie, too. Perpetual lying here that he has eaten crabs and now that he's going to buy the beverages. That's not happening. None of this is happening. Josh, you're in. Thompson, you're out.
All right.
Sports Best Live. Josh, I want to get into – this is an interesting game this week because you got two teams that really pride themselves on the defensive side of the ball. And as you looked at the All-22 tape about how the Eagles defense was able to really win that game for them. I mean, they shut down the top offense in the league, and they made it, I don't want to say look easy, but you didn't really feel like the Falcons ever got in a rhythm in that game. How were they able to do it?
Yeah, and it just starts up front with the Eagles, and that's why really any game the Eagles play, they have a chance to win because of their defensive line and how they can take over games. And one thing that really stood out to me was, if you look at the box score, you would think Benny Logan had an awful game because I don't think he had a tackle or a sack. But when you look at the film, I mean, this guy made a significant impact. He set up Connor Barwin for a tackle for loss, set up Brandon Graham for a tackle right at the line of scrimmage. And he just set up other guys. He just penetrated immediately, beat the left guard constantly off the ball, made the running back basically try to run away from him, not even running into a hole, but just run away from Benny Logan into the arms of teammates. And so that was one thing that was very apparent. In one play, even Benny Logan forced, an intentional grounding penalty, which is as good as a sack. So Benny Logan really stood out in the film in his first game back. And, really everyone on the defense played well. Michael Kendricks, I thought, had probably his best game of the season. Jordan Hicks, Nigel Bradham both played well. The safeties, Jalen Mills played well. So it was really everyone stepped up, but it all started up front.
Josh Paunil's with us. Logan, you mentioned him kind of, and Schwartz talked a little bit about him today. And it seems funny to me, like, when you ask about what Logan brings, it's not like the skill set or, what he does well. It's more that they're able to rotate guys more. So was that something that was noticeable in the game against Atlanta?
Yeah, well, that's actually one of the things was they didn't even need to rotate that much because they only played 50 snaps on defense. But that is one thing that really helps this defensive line. And that's why you even see a guy like Marcus Smith get not a ton of snaps, but a few snaps a game because they like to rotate really 4 guys at defensive end, 4 guys at defensive tackle. And so to keep guys fresh, and that's one of the reasons early in the season, the Eagles' defensive line dominated in the second half of the Pittsburgh game and those other early games because they were so fresh. And so just having another body and Benny Logan helped. Then also just the motor that guy plays with, like when he forced the intentional grounding, he wasn't used incredible technique or anything like that. It was just a high motor, high effort type play, and you can make more of those high motor plays later in the game when you have a bigger rotation.
Yeah, and obviously you saw them. Josh, Schwartz brought it up today. It's not the sacks, but it's other things. And, a lot of what Atlanta does, and Schwartz talked about this last week, was a lot of schoolyard stuff, a lot of long routes that take a lot of time. Ryan doesn't get the ball out of his hands fast. So they weren't sacking him, but I thought they were causing him to throw the ball before he wanted to on some deep routes where he was missing Julio Jones. You also had some plays where there was the intentional grounding there. So it was evident that while they didn't get the numbers, they were very disruptive in the game.
Oh, yeah, that's absolutely correct. I mean, even Fletcher Cox is a great example. He had 6 hurries in the game, which is a ridiculous number for a defensive tackle to have. And you just saw time and time again. I mean, even the first third down the Falcons had, I can't remember now if it was Brandon Graham or maybe Vinny Curry, but one of the ends pressured Matt Ryan, and he had to throw it a little before. No, it was a blitz. Excuse me, it was a blitz that came, and Matt Ryan had to get the ball out before he wanted to. And Nolan Carroll had pretty good coverage. And they just weren't able to complete the pass, and that was kind of how the day went. The Eagles would do well first and second down, long situation. Either bring the blitz or just get there with 4 guys and force him to get rid of the ball before he wanted to. And, you saw the Eagles run a lot of cover 2, or a lot more than they normally do to prevent those big plays. But they didn't really – I don't know if they even doubled Julio Jones once. I mean, maybe they did one time, but it was very rare. And so you saw some plays where there just wasn't as much help over the top, but the Falcons couldn't make anything happen because Matt Ryan had pressure in his face.
Hey, were you surprised today? I mean, I don't want to say surprised. I guess you watched the game and then watched it over, afterwards. But Schwartz kind of indicated that they moved Mills around the field with him, like almost as if he was like Darrell Revis or something. You know what I mean? Like, are they starting to look at him as kind of their guy? Like, if we want to cover someone, we're grooming Mills. Maybe he's not on that level yet, but we're grooming him to be that kind of guy. Is that what you took from that?
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely what happened in the second half. The first half, Nolan Carroll suffered that concussion late in the second quarter, but in the first half, really Jalen Mills and Nolan Carroll, they stayed on their respective sides. And in the second half, definitely the majority, probably almost every play when he could, Jalen Mills would shadow Julio Jones regardless of what side or where he lined up. And part of that was a product of Nolan Carroll suffering his concussion and Leotis McKelvin battling the hamstring injury. So I don't think it's as if going forward, they're going to have Jalen Mills follow the other team's best receiver. But I think it was two things. A, the injuries of the other cornerbacks, but also the faith that they have in Jalen Mills' mindset and mentality. I mean, confidence and competitiveness are very, very important to Jim Schwartz, which I think that's a big reason why they got rid of Eric Rowe, was because they weren't sure if he had that. And so that's what they really like in Jalen Mills. Even if he gets beat one play, he thinks the very next play, all right, well, I'll shut down Julio Jones on this play. So it's in part their faith in Jalen Mills, but then also the injury situation in that game.
Josh, how about the Eagles' safeties? Because I know Jim Schwartz talked them up today, and they played a big role last week in the win against the Falcons. What kind of situation do they face this week going up against Seattle?
Yeah, I mean, they've been a big part of their success. I talked a lot about the defense, but Rodney McLeod and Malcolm Jenkins deserve a lot of credit, too. Rodney McLeod has really been a security blanket over the top. I mean, I think Eagles fans remember well the last couple of years, all the big plays the team has given up. And Rodney McLeod is a big reason that they haven't given up a ton of big plays this year, especially in the passing game over the top, because of his range, sideline to sideline, makes life easier on the cornerbacks. And then Malcolm Jenkins, he can really do whatever you want him to do. He can play deep, he can play in the box, he can play slot corner, defend the run or pass. So his versatility has been a huge tool. And for the Seahawks this week, I think it's going to be very interesting to see how do they want to match up against Jimmy Graham, who's obviously, having a much better year than he did last year when he got to Seattle. And he's a guy that you obviously have to pay a lot of attention to. Then C.J. Prosise, third-round pick out of the backfield. How they want to match up with those two guys. And Malcolm Jenkins, you would think that when they're in nickel and the Seahawks are in three receiver sets, he'll play the slot. But I wonder if there'll be some situations where Malcolm on Jimmy Graham because they like Malcolm Jenkins' physicality and obviously athleticism. It's not like Jimmy Graham is going to outrun him. So those two guys, their versatility gives Jim Schwartz a lot of different options going up against the Seahawks offense, who, with Russell Wilson more healthy, has been a lot better lately.
Josh Paunil with us, talking Birds football as the Birds get ready to play the Seattle Seahawks on this Sunday. And, Josh, we don't hear much about Jordan Hicks, but what does he bring to the defense at the linebacker position?
Yeah, whatever you want him to do, he'll do it. Whether it's making tackles making tackles between the tackles and being physical inside. Actually, the first play of the game, he had a nice tackle, stopped them right beyond the line of scrimmage. He shed the offensive lineman, really, pushed the offensive lineman back a few yards and then made the tackle. And so he's physical inside. He can play sideline to sideline, and he's also an underrated guy in coverage. And so you have a guy that can play the run and the pass, and then also as the middle linebacker, he's kind of the quarterback of the defense. So he helps people get into position, telling them what to do, and making those calls. So he's been an invaluable piece for them, mainly because he can do almost anything you ask him to do.
Josh Paunil, PhillyMag.com. Check him out over there, Birds 24/7. And now I guess the side of the ball that will be under the microscope this week will be the offense. And when you watch this team play against a weak Atlanta defense, I don't know that anybody would say that Atlanta defense is, all that ferocious. And the Eagles kind of struggled to get the ball to the outside wide receivers. Did you find anything that stood out in that game that they can build off of? We know they ran the ball really well, but are they going to be able to do that in this particular game?
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely not going to rush for 200 yards against the Seahawks defense. I mean, just the way the Seahawks operate, if you thought the outside receivers gave you nothing last week against Atlanta, it could even lower this week going up against that Seahawks secondary. And so you have guys like that when you're Seattle, then you feel comfortable leaving them out on an island. You don't. When Nelson Aguilar is matched up against Richard Sherman, the Seahawks aren't going to be very scared and think, we got to give him, safety help over the top. So they're going to put 8 guys in the box. So it's going to be very difficult to run against the Seahawks defense. They're second in the league in points allowed for a reason. I want to say they've been first maybe the past 4 years in a row. And they really just have a lot of depth. Michael Bennett's going to be out, their defensive end, who's playing at a very high level before he got hurt. So that will help the Eagles some. But even his replacements and the other defensive ends, Frank Clark, have contributed in his place. So, you hope they can run through the tackles, but I'm not sure they're going to have a ton of success. But the really one thing that I think they're going to have to do is try to get Zach Ertz and Darren Sproles involved heavily because run game is going to be very tough. Getting the ball to the outside receivers is going to be very tough. But if they can find ways to get the ball into Zach Ertz's hands, Darren Sproles' hands, that's really going to play a big factor in this game.
Yeah, I liked, I think, Frank Reich today when he was asked about the wide receivers, specifically Aguilar. He kind of weaved and maneuvered his way around giving you anything on that one. It didn't really say much at all in terms of, hey, does he have to do better? Well, we just got to keep calling the plays, and he's got to keep doing his job. Code word for it, we got to stop throwing him the ball because we don't trust him anymore. But they got to figure out something. And this week, Dorial Green-Beckham, he kind of seemed unhappy with his role in the offense. I mean, legitimately, do you think that DGB should be given an opportunity to maybe take those Aguilar reps and plays?
I do think DGB has a claim for more opportunity, but the thing with last week was the Eagles are very focused on getting Darren Sproles and Zach Ertz the ball, and I think you should absolutely those 2 guys the ball before Dorial Green-Beckham and what he's shown so far. Now, I think it's completely reasonable to take away some of Nelson Aguilar's snaps. I mean, he's playing 80, 90% of the snaps, even more than 90% some of these weeks. And he's not giving you anything. So it's not like he's getting old. Like, it's not, Zach Ertz, the first half of the season, he wasn't giving much production, but he was doing a nice job of running his routes and getting open. Carson Wentz just wasn't finding him. It's not that way with Nelson Aguilar at all. It's not that Wentz needs to find him. That Aguilar just needs to do a better job, and he's not. So I think it would be reasonable to take away some snaps and give them to DGB. But on the other hand, DGB hasn't shown to be that great of a player yet either. Now, I think he has the tools. Obviously, he has the size and athleticism. And I think Doug Peterson really wants to work with him over the course of an offseason on the intricacies of a position. But in the short term, I do think it's fair to give him some of Nelson Aguilar's reps.
Josh Paunil with us. And Josh, one of the things we saw in the Eagles-Falcons game was, and you wrote about this, Jason Peters defies age, and he had a good game. I thought both Jason Kelsey had a good game as well. Is that as best as the offensive line has played since Lane Johnson went out?
Yeah, and that's really been surprising to me, to be honest with you, was, they played well early in the season, pretty much everyone except for Jason Kelsey. He struggled the first few weeks. But once Lane Johnson got suspended, not just, having Halapoulivaati Vaitai in that right tackle, but, what was that going to do to Brandon Brooks next to him? And how is the rest of the offensive line going to compensate? But they've really gotten better each week. Jason Kelsey, I agree, probably one of his best games of the season, if not the best. And Jason Peters, he wasn't as good the first couple of weeks, but since Lane Johnson got suspended, I think he's been playing at a very high level. And to be honest with you, it's a lot higher than I expected. And we were, a lot of people were questioning, including me, could this guy even play 65, 70% of the snaps, because he missed a third of the snaps last year. But Jason Peters, he's now 2 months away from age 35, still play at a Pro Bowl caliber level. So it's kind of crazy to see how well he's been playing at such an advanced age, well past what most offensive linemen's primes are. And so Alan Barber's coming back this week. That should give them a little bit of a boost. Brandon Brooks, I thought, also had a strong game. So really, you're having everybody improving since Lane Johnson got suspended. It's going to be very tough against the Seattle defense, but this offensive line has been surprisingly good over the course of the last month.
And just with Alan Barber, since you mentioned him coming back, one of the words we usually hear about offensive line is continuity. Is that going to shake up the continuity, especially in a week where, gosh, it's a loud stadium and the Seahawks are so good at, they have to go to a silent count and all that?
Not to mention they just ran for 208 yards behind the line last week.
Right.
Yeah, well, I think it's something that's definitely going to help them, because even though Stefan Wisniewski has been the starter the last 2 games and played, I want to say, almost all the snaps 3 games ago, Alan Barber is a guy that both Jason Peters and Jason Kelce are very comfortable with. Been here for multiple years, obviously was the starter for most of the season, even after his injury. So I don't think it will hurt them at all in terms of communication or their ability to block. I think it's something that will only help them this week.
I had kind of thrown this possibility out, to keep Wiz there at the guard spot. And I know Vaitai's been playing better, but he struggled in Washington. This place louder than Washington. You wonder if you say, Alan, we're going to ease you back in, get you some reps at right tackle. In the event that Vaitai struggles, we might need you to go there on Sunday and then maybe work him back into the guard spot.
Yeah, and that's really been one of the tricky things for the Eagles, is because, Alan Barber has played at a high level left guard. He's another guy that's been surprisingly good on this offensive line. So I think they're very concerned about, if we move him from left guard to right tackle, how much better will he be than Big V? And obviously you would think that he'd be better than Vaitai, but I'm not sure if him being an upgrade over Vaitai is big enough to make up for the drop-off going from Barber to Wisniewski at left guard. Wisniewski was solid, but I think Alan Barber has been much better this season. And so I think that's something they're very concerned about, is, are we going to hurt ourselves in 2 positions if we make this move? Let's just hope that Vaitai can continue to improve, continue to get better. But you're absolutely right. I mean, he struggled, Vaitai did, against Washington, getting off the ball because of the noise and it being an away game. But it was also his first game, so I'm actually very curious to see how he handles that crowd noise, because although it'll be much louder in Seattle, he has a little bit more experience on the road and operating on that silent snap count that they'll be using.
And they were inside today, Josh, working with crowd noise? Is that was the plan today and tomorrow?
Yeah, it was very, very loud at the Eagles practice facility today. I mean, even, seriously, if you were, 100 feet away from the practice bubble, hear the crowd noise they were pumping. That was just going through the indoor facility that they have. So they've really been pumping up the crowd noise inside the practice bubble, really all throughout practice too, not just for like a 10 to 15 minute period. It's really throughout the practice session. So that's something that they've been doing much more this week than they have in the past. Before they would just do it maybe once a week on Friday and pump in some noise, but this week they're doing it multiple days and really trying to get it loud in there so they can communicate as well as possible when they're going into Seattle.
Josh Paunil, Birds 24/7 over at PhillyMag.com, as the Eagles get ready to take on the Seattle Seahawks and their crowd. A lot talked about the crowd this week.
The 12s, they call them the 12s.
That's right. They'll raise the flag out there. They'll get ready for this one. And one thing is, when you look at this team that struggles anyway, Josh, now you have a loud place with the snap count where Amani Toomer was on yesterday with us and said he's played there before. And when you're at a wide receiver spot, he's like, you can't even hear the guy standing next to you, let alone the quarterback. You're just like reading lips out there. These guys get off the ball slow to begin with. You imagine what kind of separation they're going to get against this secondary with that crowd noise. You could almost kiss using your receivers goodbye in this one, it seems like.
Yeah, and that's why I go back to saying about how important Zach Ertz and Darren Sproles will need to be. Not only do it's going to be tougher for the outside receivers. The further away you are from the ball, obviously the tougher it's going to be able to communicate and get separation, get off the ball. So just Ertz and Sproles being closer, but also their skill sets and how they match up against the Seattle defense will be crucial. I don't think it's fair to expect much from the outside receivers, and that's why that's going to have to be a huge focus. Heading forward after this season is getting Carson Wentz some help there.
All right, Josh, we appreciate the time as always, pal. Good stuff.
Thanks for having me, guys. And let me know when we're getting that crab.